Good morning. How is everyone this morning? All right, thank you. So, criminals don't take a break. Neither do attackers, and neither should you. That's what I'm going to speak to you about over the course of this presentation. We all know that ransomware has been a problem, and it continues to be a problem. And why do attackers use it? Well, simply because it works. Many organizations still fall victim to ransomware, and that's an unfortunate statistic. I'm going to talk to you about information which has been gathered from the Sophos incident response team on the cases that they have worked on in the first half of 2023. So this is real-life information coming from customers. As in all things in cybersecurity, it is a race against time. The attackers are trying to do things as fast as possible, and the defenders, they need as much time as possible to defend against those attackers. Now, this is always the balance. You will implement security technologies, whether that's network security, endpoint security, identity. It's all about putting barriers in front of an attacker and buying defenders that valuable time. And it has never been more critical to be faster at detection and response than it is today. And I'll explain why. Now, in all of these cases that the Sophos incident response team worked on in the first half of 2023, one of the first things you will look at is, how did the attacker get in? What was their initial point of entry? And a lot of times, it was compromised credentials. So a quick show of hands, who here actually uses multi-factor authentication? Anyone? A good show of hands. I honestly wish it was more. In over 50% of the cases, the attackers got in through compromised credentials. Now, what is sad about that statistic is that we, as security professionals, we know how to solve this. We know what the answer is. Using something like multi-factor authentication, there are many options out there. Choose one of them. That can slow down an attacker if they have stolen somebody's credentials through, for example, a phishing attack. If somebody has not implemented multi-factor authentication today, my one request is, please do. It helps stop a number of attacks and a number of ways that attackers gain entry into an organization. Now, I'm going to talk to you about three things over the course of this presentation. And the first one is that dwell time continues to drop for all attacks. And that's why I state that it's never been a more critical time to accelerate detection and response. Now, we've noticed that in the attacker behavior, it takes them approximately 16 hours on average to compromise an Active Directory, to reach the domain controller. And I'll explain why that's important and why they do that. And the last point is, these attackers don't sleep. And that's why I say neither should you, because you need to be constantly defending against them. Now, attackers do actually take some rest, but they work as a part of a team. They will hand over from one shift to another, just as you would do in a normal environment as well. Now, I'm not saying that defenders shouldn't sleep. That's actually a recipe for disaster. But you need to be able to monitor your environment around the clock. Because the attackers don't stop, you shouldn't either. Now let's look at dwell time. Dwell time is essentially the difference between from the start of the attack to when the attack was detected. And that has been decreasing over the last several years. In 2020, that was 18 days, reducing to 11 days in 2021, 9 days in 2022, and 5 days in the first half of this year. And you have to ask yourself, why? Why is it decreasing? Well, I will posit three possible explanations to you. The first one is that customers have been engaging, for example, the service of managed detection and response, so they have faster times to detect and respond to an attacker. The next possible solution is that larger organizations have built up their own internal SOC who can do the same tasks, and they are detecting and responding to the attacks faster. And the third one is, if you're a small organization and you have an IT administrator or a security administrator who is very passionate, they might teach themselves how to do this, and they will, of course, over time, learn and increase their speed to detect and respond. But all of this is putting time pressure on the attackers. They have less time to conduct their reconnaissance, to perform their execution, the exfiltration of data, and then to deploy the ransomware. Now, why do they go after Active Directory? Well, we have noticed, like I said, on average, 16 hours for an attacker to come in and compromise Active Directory. And why do they do this? Well, essentially, your Active Directory controls a lot of your organization. They can create a user. They can restrict the possibilities and the privileges of your existing administrators. They can remove all privileges from your IT team. This is the crown jewel of most organizations, and generally it makes a part of their identity infrastructure. That's why this is so important. If they compromise the AD server, then they have the ability to continue their attack unheeded. Now, what we have noticed as well is that many times those Active Directory services are either running Microsoft Defender or they're not protected at all. The second option is very bad because it essentially gives them an unprotected device on which to continue their attack. And for the first one, Microsoft Defender, it's an unfortunate fact that our adversaries have become quite adept at disabling Microsoft Defender. So please have some form of protection on your Active Directory servers, because if you do not, it gives them a safe place. And worse than that, it's a trusted location for them to continue their attack. Because with Active Directory, you can also deploy the ransomware across the organization. That's why this is a key risk. That's why they go after these Active Directory servers. Now, the T1562 that you see there, this is related to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This is the actual technique where they use to disable Microsoft Defender, and we see it a lot more often. Now, when do they actually carry out their attacks? Well, if we look at the start of the attack and when the attack is detected, you see a nice correlation. They tend to start their attacks roughly in the middle of the week, but when are the attacks detected? For example, when do they start executing the ransomware? Well, it happens to be approximately 50% of the time on a Friday evening or a Saturday. Is anybody here working on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday? Not many, well, no one put their hand up. So essentially, why do they do this? Well, they don't want to be slowed down by the attackers. So they are launching their attacks at a time when they suspect nobody is working. And it's a safe bet that on a Friday afternoon or a Friday evening or over the weekend that nobody is watching. And why do they want to start their attacks when nobody is watching? Because you're not there to slow them down. You're not there to eject them from the devices, from the systems, from your environment. That's why they do that. And more interesting, if you look at the time of day when they start their attacks, you will notice that approximately 80% of the time is not during office hours. They will conduct and start their attacks sometime between 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. The sweet spot actually happens to be around 11 p.m. at night. They're making an assumption that, the defenders are asleep. I don't know about you, but generally at 11 p.m. I am asleep. And you will notice that for those times where they attack during office hours, only 3 of them happen between 8 and 9 a.m. on a weekday. There's only 2 other times where they attack. Midday, guess what most people do at midday? They go for lunch. And around 4 p.m. in the afternoon. People get tired, they might be leaving work. But the majority of the attacks happen when you're not there. So this is why I state that you should continuously look for ransomware. For not only ransomware, but all threats across your environment. because they know that you're not looking and they will take advantage of that. So that gets to the so what of what I'm talking about here. And these are my requests to you. The first one is have a plan. Have an incident response plan. Pray that you never have to use it. But if the unfortunate day occurs where you need to put it into action, you have it. You have something you can refer to. There is nothing worse than being in a blind panic when an incident occurs. The attackers are going to force you to act faster, and that's when most people make mistakes, because we're all human. You want as much time as possible to respond. And you do that by the next point, making it harder. Look at your environment. What can you do? Do you have to implement network security, endpoint security, identification? There's so many different things you can do. Look at what is right for your organization, because each barrier that you put up, it makes it harder for the attacker. It's another hoop that they need to jump through. And then also, the result of that is it buys your defenders time that they can detect the attack and respond to it. And the next part is always be watching. And this goes back to the previous slide where I talked about the time of day when attackers will launch their attack. You need to constantly be vigilant because the attackers will exploit any weakness that they can. These ransomware attackers, they are relentless, they are creative, and they are willing to pivot from one attack technique to another because they are determined to succeed. They are determined to put you under pressure. And when you detect that there is something suspicious going on, be ready to investigate. You need to be able to go in and find out what they've been doing. Work out or perform an investigation to say, what is this particular attacker done? What are they trying to achieve? And then stop them from doing it. And then implied in that is your response. And your goal, of course, is to eject the attacker. Now, this is the constant time battle between attacker and defender. Who wins? It's the person who moves fastest. Does the attacker get to deploy their ransomware and start the attack? And then you hope that your, for example, endpoint defenses saves you at that point in time? Or do the defenders work out that they have come in through a vulnerability or through some compromised credentials and then have expanded across the network and then want to launch their attack? And finally, protect everything. Now, I mentioned about Active Directory services, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about unprotected devices of any kind. And I'll just talk generally about endpoints and servers at this point. If you have an unprotected device, that is a safe space for an attacker to continue their attack, whether their goal is to exfiltrate data, to launch ransomware, or whatever their objective happens to be. Do not give them that safe space. Because if a device is not protected, you have less visibility into what they're doing, what can go on. Now, there are two types of ransomware if I look at things quite generically. There is ransomware that executes locally, so in which case if you have something like endpoint protection, it's going to detect it and stop it from running. And there is ransomware that executes remotely. This happens to be the topic of the day. In approximately 80% of the ransomware cases that the Sophos incidents team investigated, they used remote ransomware. And what does that mean? The attacker found a safe space on the network, and then they connected to file shares, different servers, different locations, and they encrypted remotely. The endpoint protection on the device that had the data did not necessarily detect that those files were being encrypted. So they still suffered, all because there was a safe space. Now, Sophos actually produces a range of products and services to help you with that. Come and speak to us if you like. We also, I will point out, release several reports every year. Once a year, we release a State of Ransomware report, and once a quarter, we release an Active Adversary report that states what are the current trends that we see from attackers that defenders should pay attention to. All of these reports are freely available. I suggest that if you have time, go and download them and read them because they provide valuable insight into emerging attacker behavior. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony Mary right there, of course, sharing with us ransomware countermeasures because, as he said, of course, criminals don't take any breaks and neither should your security, because a race against time is essentially what a ransomware attack is. And you need to be able to put the barriers there to buy time and, of course, for your defenders to be able to put the countermeasures in place. And remember that these attackers are normally weekend warriors. They like to attack on weekends when everyone else is off relaxing. So make sure that you don't take breaks on your security doesn't take breaks on weekends as well. There you go. 80% of these attacks happen outside of office hours. So thank you again, Mr. Mary, of course, of Sophos through WSI.